Good on the National Police Foundation for this, and they're not mincing words. They're saying we want action now. We want the Liberals to act now. Clock's ticking, Mark Miller. Let's see how long it takes. CBC has been forced to pause the production on a satirical Indigenous prank show after the union representing RCMP members accused the production of misleading officers, humiliating them on camera, and using taxpayer-funded media to do it. The National Police Federation says its members were told they were being interviewed for a project honoring their service, but instead were drawn into a CPC APTN comedy production, under false pretenses. Now, the union says it has engaged its legal team, is demanding the content be cancelled, and wants the federal government to investigate how this happened. Let's take a look.
So, fake names, fake premise, and what's the point of all of this, Lindsay? What have you figured out that they are trying to do with this production they're pretending is a documentary series on Canadian history and historical figures?
Right. I mean, both Francis and I noticed that this had no lighthearted element to it. This was not a prank show where you could shake hands afterwards and, oh, that was so funny. And yeah, you really got me. No, this was humiliation. They sought out people whose views they disagree with and they want to embarrass. And that is who they set their sights on. And this was all just a trick. They wanted to waste our time. They want to make us look bad. I mean, I can already tell what it's going to be, right? For me, part of the job that Mike Smith, as Francis also encountered and filmed, Mike Smith was my employer at Heritage Figures Canada. He had me dig up some historical Sir John A. quotes. He said he was going to program the quotes into a children's toy. And so I found him some quotes. But then when I get there to the studio to film the second interview, they choose the worst of Sir John A. Macdonald's quotes. And then they just kind of watch to see what I'll do. And then they're going to, play pre-recorded footage they got of me saying, I endorse this toy, because that was part of the job, is I have to say, I endorse this toy. So they'll play the racist, the worst quotes, and then have me endorsing the toy. That's the humor element.
That's the humor.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's Lindsay Shepherd on with Brian Lilly, and Francis Whittleson was on with Brian as well. I encourage you to watch the entire video. It's about 17 minutes long. It is worth a watch. You can get to know more of the story of Lindsay and also the RCMP members, because we have more details on that. So check that out. Links in the description to watch the full thing. But this is the fascinating thing. So Lindsay essentially goes through and says, listen, they initially called me to do this quote-unquote interview, and the interview went pretty well, and they wanted to essentially gain my trust, and they did that. And then they said it went so well, they wanted to hire her for a job. And this was to go and research Sir John A. and get some great quotes, and then they were going to do a toy, and as she laid it out. This is not humor, folks. This is entrapment. That's what this rings to me. I'm no legal expert, but this is what that feels like. Because there's no comedic reveal, right? You watch any other prank show, by the end, some people may be annoyed by it, but they're like, haha, you got me, I got you. And it's all in good fun. But this is not what that is. This is malicious. This is insidious. I don't see anybody that is going to laugh at this. Who is going to laugh at somebody holding up a Sir John A. figurine only for somebody to try and paint Sir John A. as a race? Like, I don't see people that like John A. I don't see them finding that humorous. And the people that hate Sir John A., I don't see them finding that humorous either. So if neither audience is going to find this humorous, what are you left with? Well, then humor isn't the actual goal here, is it? That's the only interpretation I can get from this. And that's the interpretation that Lindsay and Francis and many other people that have talked about this as well. Because it's We're into almost 10 people that have been caught in this. Now, as this story has been breaking, the RCMP evidently is kind of annoyed with this, and so they should be. Because, remember, we said on the Francis Whittleson interview, the Liberals were standing up, and CBC was standing up, and they were so annoyed with what Pierre Poilievre said back in the fall that they were saying we should be standing up for our RCMP. We should be standing up to protect it and to respect it, and all of this virtue signaling. Well, where are you now, Liberals? They're in a really tight spot now, because they're in a spot where the CBC and the APTN have been going after, let's just call it conservative voices. Not all conservatives share the views, but the people that are actually talking about this and doing this research and sharing these views are conservative. I don't see any liberals there. So you have them going after them. And now there's a whole bunch of backlash, including from the RCMP, because they went after RCMP retired officers as well. So what do you do if you're the Liberals? Do you stick up for the Conservatives? Or do you side against the RCMP? This is going to be the magical question. I think the CBC and the APTN have caused a big political problem for the Liberal Party of Canada. But let's see what the RCMP had to say. This is actually from one of the National Police Foundation websites. So it says, RCMP members intentionally misled in CBC Entertainment APTN production. National Police Foundation demands cancellation and taxpayer accountability. The National Police Federation, representing approximately 20,000 members across Canada, has written to the Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, Mr. Mark Miller, to call for immediate action and express outrage and shock that active and retired RCMP members were intentionally misled into participating in interviews under false pretenses for taxpayer-funded production involving CBC Entertainment and APTN. RCMP members were invited under the false pretense that they would be taking part in a program recognizing and honoring their service. Instead, they were drawn into a production built on fabricated identities and a hoax that condemned the RCMP and, by extension, its members, while disparaging their service to Canadians. In short, participants were deceived, insulted, and publicly shamed at the expense of Canadian taxpayers. For many active and retired RCMP officers, this experience is deeply distressing. These are individuals who have spent decades sacrificing their own safety and well-being while responding to traumatic events. Too often, their selfless acts lead to occupational stress, injuries, and carry beyond their service. Being deceived, ambushed on camera, and subjected to potential public humiliation is not aligned with Canadians' deep respect for those who serve and risks compounding existing trauma, which is unacceptable. Quote, "This is a profound breach of trust," end quote, said NPF President and CEO Brian Sauvé. Quote, "RCMP members participated in good faith, believing they were contributing to something that honored their and others' service. Instead, they were subjected to a process that left many feeling betrayed and re-traumatized. That demands retraction and accountability," end quote. National Police Foundation is calling for immediate federal action, including an immediate halt to broadcast of this content, an urgent inquiry into the planning, approval, and funding of this production, determining improper use of federal funds and potential recovery, requiring CBC Entertainment and APTN to identify the personnel and decision makers responsible for authorizing and executing these deceptive tactics, and determining safeguards to prevent similar conduct in future productions involving vulnerable or unsuspecting participants. Quote, "Trust in public institutions is not optional, it is earned," end quote, said Sauvé. Quote, "When that trust is broken in this way, there must be consequences and there must be change," end quote. The NPF is urging the federal government to respond swiftly and decisively, warning that failure to act will further erode public confidence in federally funded institutions, public safety, and the respect deserved by and owed to those in service. So that is a very stern, harsh, and direct response. And they're absolutely right. You know, they reference officers, but they also reference participants, because it's not just the officers. that have been victims here. This has been underhanded, it has been sneaky, it has been malicious. And the fact that they still try and say, well, this is a comedy, this is a comedy. Sorry, nobody's buying it at all. So good on the National Police Foundation for this. And they're not mincing words. They're saying we want action now. We want the Liberals to act now. Clock's ticking, Mark Miller. Let's see how long it takes. Now, we also took a look at how the CBC and the APTN responded to the RCMP issuing this as well. Check this out. Police Federation calls for probe of CBC APTN show, says officers were misled. National Police Federation is calling for an inquiry into a CBC and APTN comedy show. It says intentionally misled current and former members of the RCMP to get them to agree to interviews. The show, which has not aired, is described by the Indigenous Screen Office as a satire program meant to, quote-unquote, flip the script on modern and historical injustices against Indigenous peoples. Quote, with outrageous humor, they flip the script on modern and historical injustices against Indigenous peoples, offering a fresh, timely perspective on the prank genre akin to shows like Borat and the Yes Men, end quote, the Indigenous Screen Office said in an online post about the show. National Police Federation says RCMP members who were invited to participate in the show were told they would be recognized and honored for their service, but were instead, quote, deceived, insulted, and publicly shamed at the expense of Canadian taxpayers, end quote. So that was by the Canadian press, but the APTN posted that on their website. This is what the CBC had to say. CBC pausing production on satirical Indigenous show. Northland Tales alleged to have unfairly lured high-profile guests into interviews. CBC is pausing production on a prank comedy series after the broadcaster was called out when two women who have expressed controversial opinions about Canada's residential schools claimed they were targeted by the show. Quote, it is important for us in the execution that this entertainment series does not negatively impact our news brand, end quote. Chuck Thompson, a spokesperson for CBC, said in a statement. Quote, with that context, we are currently pausing on production while we assess the existing footage, end quote. The series, which has not aired yet, is a co-production between the CBC and the Aboriginal People's Television Network, or APTN. As a broadcasting partner, APTN respects CBC's decision and is in ongoing communication with them regarding next steps, end quote. Joelle Seitel for APTN Media said in an email to CBC News. Seitel said while APTN remains committed to supporting Indigenous storytelling, it did, quote, not have additional details to share, end quote. The details of the interviews the two women shared have sparked condemnation from some conservative politicians who questioned why the CBC would be involved in such a project. Maybe the author of that article should have taken into account the RCMP announcement that actually came out the same day, which was yesterday. Oops. Doesn't make it look very good, does it? Because what the RCMP are calling on is essentially we want the identities, we want the positions, we want to know everybody who actually made these decisions. And I think that's fair. It's more than fair. Because the intention was for CBC and APTN to publicly shame, essentially publicly flog all of these people in front of the Canadian public and the world. Because let's be honest, this would be viewed all over the world. It would go on YouTube. And once this gets on the internet, it never goes away. That's a big problem for these folks. So if you were going to do that to them, ironically, the RCMP is now flipping the script, as it were, saying, let's have the identities of everybody who made these decisions that brought this here to the in the first place. So remember I said, these shows just don't arise out of nothing. Someone would have had to actually approve this at CBC. Most likely, someone high up. And it's funny that the initial statements that were coming out of CBC when this story was starting to break, they said, this has nothing to do with CBC News, just saying, it's over there. And now they're saying, well, we don't want this to impact the reputation of CBC News. I think it's too late for that, Chuck, because CBC News already doesn't have a very high public opinion level. And the fact that CBC, as an entity, authorized a show to be in partnership with the APTN where the sole purpose, from everything that we've heard, was to go after specifically conservative voices, humiliate them, traumatize them, and try to make it seem like they've scored some sort of justice points here, all in the name of quote-unquote comedy and a prank, in a world, in a country where the liberals are allegedly so committed to reconciliation, in a country where the liberals are allegedly trying to say we want to make things more inclusive and not divisive, and a federal agency using taxpayer dollars has authorized a show like this. Ladies and gentlemen, the RCMP is finally doing something. Maybe it's time we clap our hands, because at least it's something.